What is up, everybody? Mr. Purse here. Welcome to unit number 4, Transoceanic Interconnectedness, 1450 to 1750. But you should already know that. This is 4.6. We're talking about the European influence in West Africa and Asia. Some of the stuff in the end of this video is going to connect back to unit 3, which was on the Gunpowder Empire. So I won't focus too much on the Asia side of things because really we've talked about it already. But I just want to kind of bring it together in a nice little mesh, or dare I say, syncretism. So here we go. Europeans in West Africa. Again, this goes back to topic 4.5, which was on Europeans in North America and the Caribbean, specifically chattel slavery. But I do want to connect this from the West African perspective because we really took the European and what is going to become known as this of the African Americans or African slaves who are brought to the Americas. So really I want to just take a minute to show you or explain what's going on in West Africa. So first, Europeans are coming onto the coast here of West Africa, and they're essentially exchanging guns, which is obviously, we talked about this, and this was a theme in Unit 3, and the theme in this one is if you have access to gunpowder, whether it's cannons or guns themselves, you have access to expand your empire. And the West Africans realized very quickly that if they can get their hands on these guns, the people that they're fighting against to expand their kingdom or their empire who don't have guns, they can expand. So the Europeans are coming with the guns, and they're going to exchange for slaves, obviously, as well as ivory and gold, which are both things that are in high demand and of high value for people, not only in Europe, but around the world. So I do want to point out that the slave coast, or the trade of slaves along the west coast of Africa, really goes from here all the way down here, and there is some slave trade that goes on down here. So the people who live up here in kind of the northwest part of Africa are very different culturally and ethnically and religiously than the people down here, yet they're all going to be brought to the same region of the world. So we're going to see a very diverse group of people who are enslaved, that they're not very homogeneous is the word, that they're not all the same in culture and language. So, and part of what we talked about is the difficulty in rebelling in the Americas was part of this, is this difference culturally. So I do just want to point that out. Also, in terms of slave outposts or the slave trade outposts, this is what you would find on throughout the west coast of Africa. Some of these still remain as museums or monuments or symbols to this kind of mass genocide and mass slavery that goes on in the Americas. In terms of in West Africa with the governance and how it impacts the government, during this time period of 1450 to 1750, we don't see the same type of large empire in West Africa that we saw in circa 1200 to 1450. And what we see is really smaller kingdoms. You could consider them empires, but they're on a much smaller scale. And you can see that there's a bunch of them all throughout West Africa. And oftentimes these kingdoms might go to war with each other, or one kingdom might, when they go to war, might capture some prisoners, and those prisoners would then be sold into slavery. And one of the ones I just want to focus on is the Assante Kingdom right here, which is going to be in modern day Ghana. They are going to be active in the slave trade. So if you check out the map right here, we're talking right here, kind of on the ivory, like right in between the ivory and the Gold Coast area. So they're kind of right on the cusp of that. I do want to make sure that we're all aware that the slavery that exists in West Africa and that had existed in West Africa prior to 1450. So there had been slavery in this region, and their slaves were part of circa to 1200, 1450 along the sub-Saharan trade route, and were being sold into the Islamic Empire up here. But the slavery is much, much different than the slavery that's going to take place in the Americas. And I'm not defending, I don't want slavery to be defended in any way. Slavery is slavery. Buying and selling of people is a horrible human rights violation and a crime against humanity. However, people in West Africa, the treatment of their slaves was much better than what we see in American slavery. Slaves were rarely abused in West Africa, although there were some instances where slaves were forced to throw themselves on the funeral pyre or the fire of their slave owner when the slave died. So that's not very good. But in terms of like day-to-day abuses, that psychological, that physical torture that we see in the Americas, that doesn't really take place on the scale that we see as we see in America in West Africa. Children, if you were a slave and you have a child, that child is born free for the most part in West Africa, unlike what we see in the chattel slavery in North America. Also, you could choose who you want to marry, with whom you'd wanted to marry. Also, things like you could hold high-ranking positions. Like you could become, in some areas in West Africa, if you were a slave, you could hold almost a governorship, which is unheard of in the Americas. So I just want to point out there's very much a difference between West African slavery and American. Now, at first, when these people in West Africa are selling other West Africans into slavery, they think that it's going to be a similar system. And then eventually they realize, like, these Europeans are treating these people pretty bad when they're putting them on the ships. But the money comes in and the guns come in, so people rationalize away this enslaving. And also, there's no sense of nationalism here. These people don't look at themselves in this region as similar. They're all different ethnic groups, different cultural, different religious groups. So they don't look as like, hey, we're selling fellow West Africans into slavery. We're selling someone from the Swahili States up here into slavery, and we're the Assante. That's not like us. So that's different. The Assante Kingdom is going to get very wealthy off this. They actually exist until 1957, and they're eventually going to become the country of Ghana. So this is a long kingdom and a long empire that's very wealthy and very profitable in this region. In terms of culturally, there's a huge impact. We're talking approximately 12.5 million people are forcibly taken from West Africa and brought to the Americas. That's going to have a huge impact back in West Africa on the culture of that region. You are losing a lot of people, and a lot of those people are not, I think there's a Western stereotype that those who were enslaved were kind of this lower class, uneducated, and that is far from true. Some people who were enslaved and sold into slavery were all across the socio-economic pyramid, so social and economic scale. So you're going to have really wealthy people, highly educated people, in some cases like local kings and nobles, who are also going to be sold into this. Now, obviously, most people are going to be peasants because that's what most people around the world are, but there are going to be people all across the social pyramid in West Africa. And when you take those people and remove these highly educated, important figures from local regions and take them out, there's really this collapse of some local governments who are then going to be conquered by these people who do have guns in West Africa. Also, we just have less men overall. So we have this huge, 2/3 of all people who were sold into slavery were men. So you have this difference now of gender ratio. So you have to figure out a way, if you have 2 females for every male adult, how do you repopulate? And we're going to see the beginning of some polygamy in West Africa where one man can marry 2 wives because that woman otherwise wouldn't have a spouse. And if you don't have a spouse, it's problematic in West Africa, like a lot of civilizations at this time where you were expected to be married to someone of the other gender. So this really is going to destabilize this region. And this slave trade is not existing for like 10 years. This is going on. This capturing of people is from the 1600s through the mid 1800s. So it's a long span that we're talking about, that it's constantly, you're losing people and you're losing people and you're losing people. Like I said, the Europeans are going to set up trade areas on the coast. They're really going to set up what are called outposts, where you send some Europeans to this region to kind of control it. Not a large area, but like little areas on the coast to continue to get that supply of slaves. It's hugely profitable for the Europeans, especially the Portuguese. Switching gears just a little bit, we're going to see these outposts as well, not just in West Africa, but also in East Africa here, as well as in Southeast Asia. So, when I say, again, these outposts are going to be areas that Europeans are going to attempt to control. And it's going to be a very loose control. It's not strict government control, but there's a European presence. And so we're going to have the Portuguese here in kind of Southwest Africa, as well as the Eastern Africa here, which if you don't remember from Unit 2 is called the Swahili States. So we have the Swahili States here. We also have the Dutch are going to control Southeast Asia right here. And this is the Strait of Malacca, if you happen to forget that. So the Dutch are going to be in control here. And then we also have the Philippines here, which is under Spanish control, named after King Philip. Some of these European countries are going to limit interaction. If you don't remember, the Japanese are going to limit the Dutch interaction and just allow the Dutch to come in and trade. So we have a lot going on here. Remember, the goal has always been for Europeans and for everybody really to get to China and India. And by setting up these trade outposts, it allows you to get a little closer. That's all I got. You got any questions? Write it down. Let me know. I'm out.